What is year one like for an actor? How much money will you make? What about year 5, year 20? I've been at this for over 20 years, so I want to break it down for you, at least my journey, so that you might be able to gain some insight and perhaps even recalibrate your own expectations. Hey, I'm Matthew Cornwell with Get Taped, which I co-own with my amazingly talented, beautiful wife and best friend, Brooke. Okay, let's jump in. And I'll try to give some specific numbers, but they'll largely be irrelevant to you and your journey because I don't know when you started or where you started. But it's the overall trends in the numbers that I present that will be helpful for this discussion. And let's start with year one. Okay, year one will likely just be an investment year for you, and for good reason. You need to spend that time doing that hidden, unseen work in acting class. Every profession ever requires this time. I get it. We live in an instant gratification society, and especially in this industry, people see that luster of fame and fortune and think it's something that can come to them overnight. So if you are expecting to become an overnight sensation, well, you're on the wrong YouTube channel, for one. You may just need to start recalibrating those expectations. And I'd even go so far as to recommend that if you're new to acting, refrain from self-submitting to auditions until you've been in acting class for a few months. Even if you've had theater experience or training, you need to learn how this industry works, how a set works, before you go self-submitting even for an indie project. Now, I won't get lost in the weeds on that topic. That's for a different day. For our discussion, I'm going to use calendar years to walk you through my journey of year 1, year 5, year 20. Now, year 1 for me was 2001. I actually had classes in college. I had done theater going back to high school, but 2001 was when I really started to think about it as a potential profession to pursue. So we'll start there. Now, I didn't jump into class until September of that year, so I really only had those last 4 months for our discussion. And classes were cheap back then, at least in Atlanta, so I only spent $400 that year. But I had 0 auditions, 0 bookings, and 0 income from acting. So year 1, like I mentioned before, was just an investment year. In other words, I made no profit. I made no money whatsoever from acting. So now let's look at the first full year for me, which was 2002. I was in class the whole year, so that's $1,200 to classes alone. I also got an agent in May of 2002, which is a fun story in its own right, which I'll save for another day. This meant that I had to go get professional headshots, which I can't remember how much I paid. I could not find a pay stub in my records anywhere. But once you factor in the reproductions, because yes, back then you had to get 300 copies of your headshot printed at one time, we'll just say that the total cost of that all in was about $500. Now, in today's dollars, you should expect to spend anywhere from $200 to $500 on that first headshot session. So my full investment for 2002 was the $1,200 for classes plus the $500 for headshots. We'll just say $1,700, even though I also had some wear and tear on my car, gas, and other incidental expenses. We're not going to worry about it for this discussion, but those are very real dollars that have real economic impact on you. So when you're doing your own analyses, keep that in mind. Now for income, I did book my first paid acting job. Hooray! It was an extra job for a SAG national commercial. So in 2002, it probably only paid maybe $300. And I think I'm being generous there. That's if there was overtime and maybe a wardrobe fee, which there wouldn't have been because I was in full football gear that they provided. But I digress. We're going to say that for the entirety of 2002, my total income was $300 and my total expenses were $1,700. That means that I lost $1,400 that year. Wow, so when you factor in year 1 as a $400 loss and year 2 as a $1,400 loss, then years 1 and 2 combined was an $1,800 loss. Yikes, that's a pretty expensive hobby, am I right? And so let's look at a really fancy graph. This is a bar chart with dollars made over here and time on the x-axis. So year 1 is represented here as that $400 expense, $0 income. Year 2 is closer to $1,700 expenses and $300 income. And that's just not looking too good. Now, years 3, 4, and 5, the investment is going to be around the same because I stayed in classes all 12 months of all of those years. And there's probably other incidental expenses that might push each of those years closer to $2,000 in expenses. Because again, I had wear and tear on my car driving to places like New Orleans, Wilmington, even down to Florida or up to Tennessee for auditions. Not to mention another headshot session, which is going to be even more money with with the reproductions and the copies of my resume that I had to make every time that I had an audition, etc. So cumulatively, over the first 5 years of my career, it's safe to say that I invested at least $8,000. But I made closer to $9,000. Success! There was a film in there, no television just yet, a few commercials, and a bunch of industrial training films. So the good news is, at this point, 5 years in, my hobby is now a career. At least from a tax standpoint, because once you're making a profit and you can start writing off those expenses against that profit, the IRS is now considering this something that you're actually pursuing professionally, and it's no longer a hobby. But again, this transition from hobby to career didn't happen until year 5. Let's go back to my fancy chart. Ooh, we got some new data on here. Because in year 3, I only made like $650 from acting. So that was still a losing year. And cumulatively, I was still losing money in this journey that I was on. Year 4, my income finally exceeded my yearly expenses. I made closer to $1,700. But like I said, there might have been unaccounted for expenses in year 4, so this red bar might actually be taller. The point being that it wasn't until this anomaly in year 5 that not only did I make a lot more money than I spent that year, but it caught me up. In other words, this green bar canceled out all of these red bars, all of that remaining debt, if you will, that I had accumulated from the first 4 years of my acting journey. So that's my first real point, my real lesson for you watching. And that is the first few years of this journey are going to be a losing venture from a monetary standpoint. Yikes. 4 years and almost nothing to show for it. At least that's how you might be thinking about it. Or even worse, your family and your friends, the muggles in your life that don't understand why you're pursuing this. The people are saying, hey, why don't you get a real job? Or why don't you fall back on your fallback plan? Haven't you given this enough time? Thankfully, I had supportive parents and didn't give up, because in that 5th year, I finally became profitable. All right, let's skip to year 20, which was the year 2020 for me. I had amassed over 70 IMDb credits, and with those credits, the ones that were for union television and film productions, it means that I have a steady stream of residual income. Residuals, one of the greatest human inventions. So at this point in my career, I can reasonably assume that I'm going to make a few grand every quarter just from residual income. This means that even in a year of slim bookings, I can almost make insurance on residuals alone. Which, if you didn't know, to qualify for insurance with SAG-AFTRA, you have to make over $27,000 in 4 consecutive quarters. Not an easy task, especially in this sort of, slower time in the industry. Now, let's talk about my expenses in year 20 of my career. Headshots are still an expense every couple of years, and as you progress in your career, you're going to possibly use more expensive photographers. So that expense can range anywhere from $500 to $1,000 or more, depending on who you go with, how much makeup costs, how many looks you do, etc. Now, my investment in classes has gone down. I was in classes every month for at least 7 to 9 years. Literally. Didn't miss a single month of being in class for that long. Oftentimes was in 2 classes at the same time, an acting class and an improv class. As I transitioned in my second decade of this career, I did less and less of the weekly or monthly classes, and instead was looking for more targeted workshops or shorter classes that were emphasizing a specific skill set that I felt like I needed improvement upon. The other expense that I don't have to worry about since I own a taping studio, but everyone else who doesn't will have to think about, is even in year 20, the self-taping expenses. Now, without going down that rabbit hole, you do get to save in potentially the car expenses of driving across LA or Atlanta or New York or wherever you might be located. So there is an offset in wear and tear in your car if you're self-taping at home, but there is the added expense of the equipment, or if you come to a service like Get Taped, then you are paying for each audition that you're going in for. So you will have to factor that into your budget or your sort of yearly analysis of cost versus income when it comes to this career. So without divulging all of my finances, since you're not my CPA, I will say that I'm lucky enough to be in the top 13% of all SAG-AFTRA earners most years, because that's how few union actors actually qualify for insurance each year. Again, the threshold is $27,540 or $450 right now in 2025. If you don't reach that threshold, you don't qualify for insurance. again, a topic for a different day. So out of 160,000 union performers, that means that I make more on a yearly basis, on average, than 140,000 of them. So here's another point to consider. If I'm barely making that threshold for insurance each year, some years I'm well over it, some years I'm just at it, some years I'm under it, and Brooke has to be the one that qualifies for insurance. It means that neither Brooke nor myself are exactly rolling in it. I mean, think about it. In today's society, can you live on $27,000 a year? I mean, technically, yes, but you're not exactly middle class at that point, are you? And even with the combined income of Brooke and I, it means that we still need a side hustle, even 20 years into this game. Okay, so that's the overview of the 20-year journey of an actor. If you have questions at this point, please drop them below. And so I'll end with just a few points to consider. First, every profession requires heavy investment before you expect to see a return on that investment. So if you're hesitant to take classes or to take more classes because it just feels like you're spending more money and you're not seeing any return, that's normal. That's expected. It's actually sort of required to make this a long-term venture for yourself. You do need a plan to pay the bills while you build that foundation of craft. It's just part of the deal. Furthermore, you should expect to be in the red cumulatively for 5 to 8 years. And on a year-to-year basis, it will be a couple years, maybe 3 to 5 years before your yearly income exceeds that year's costs. So that transition from hobby to career could happen at year 3, 4, 5, or year 8, and that's okay. Your journey is going to be individual. Just understand that you should not expect to be profitable in year 1. That is going to be so rare, and it might actually end up coming back to haunt you because you now expect to keep growing your business from there, and you might actually go down on year 2 and year 3 and year 4 before you see that uptick again. And here's another point to consider. In those early years, when you start with 0 training and now you are training, your growth is going to be so steep and so fast, and it's going to feel great. But that is going to flatten out over time. There's only so much you're going to learn. And even though Meisner said it'll take you 20 years to fully understand this craft, the first couple of years are going to be very steep in that learning. And then you'll spend the next, 15 years making progress, but it's not going to be as measurable as those first couple of years. And so likewise, if you see growth in your income in those first couple of years, don't expect that to be a straight line up. There are countless anecdotes of actors who quit those day jobs or quit those survival jobs thinking that that one breakthrough into that next tier was the symbol of stardom that is just inevitable. And what ends up happening is that actor, kind of like Icarus, flies too close to the sun and then they burn up. And they wonder why they're broke and declaring bankruptcy less than a year after that big break. One of the last points I want to make is about residuals. Here I am 20 plus years into this journey, and I'm still not above taking a one-line role or a one-day role, even at scale occasionally. I have a video about that. And one of the reasons, especially if that show is doing well on streaming, is it means that I'm going to be adding to that residuals pool that I get every month or every quarter. So even though that job might be unfulfilling today, and I might be shucksing it because it's only one day at scale, it might be the very job that gets me insurance next year or the year after or both. So if you take a long-term approach to this industry, you might change your viewpoint on whether or not it's time to give up or to stop accepting those one-line auditions, those co-star auditions, because in a season like this where there's so few opportunities for any actor, it means that someone like me, who didn't say no to those roles for the last 20 years, has a lot of residual income that is coming to me each quarter, and that feels good. I'm not so worried about having to book something this week or this month or next month because I have this steady, reliable source of residual income. But, and here's the final point, mo money, mo problems. In other words, try not to covet that next level in your career. You may want to transition from co-stars to guest stars only, or from that occasional guest star to series regular only, or being on the movie poster. I get it. I have goals and ambitions as well. But divorce yourself from the notion that if I would only be able to be given that chance to be that series regular, then all my problems in life would be over and I would be sitting pretty. Not true. Because if you cannot find fulfillment in where you are right now, If the elements of your life feel so out of whack that you think that just booking that role or just getting that agent or that manager or just ending up on that movie poster will solve your problems, I guarantee 100% it will not. Because once again, if you cannot find contentment and fulfillment where you are right now, then whatever you're searching for will not bring that contentment or that fulfillment. This industry might seem like a good friend, and it can be at times, but it is a terrible lover. So be careful about what you are putting up on that pedestal. If it's the fame and the fortune and the limelight and having that star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I suggest that you recalibrate. Okay, if you haven't already dropped a comment below, drop one now. Let me know what you think based on where you are in your journey. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on set.